and the share button. And let's zoom in on that document.
And can I mention her now? Or
Yes, please.
Okay.
Before we start, Anne wants to dedicate tonight's learning for Shlema.
There's a person that you may possibly know from Baltimore. Her name is Denise Gilbert. She was from Morocco. I don't know if anyone here knew her. She went to Eretz Israel. Her Hebrew name is Haya Dina Bas Esther. Haya Dina Bas Esther. She was just shot in the latest terrorist attack.
Right.
And she may lose she was in a bus and it was the glass that went into her eye. So she's in the hospital right now, hoping to save her eye.
Okay, before Shlema.
Amen.
All right. I think.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think. Did you all hear that it's being recorded? Did I hit that already?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So tonight we are going to base ourselves in the Parsha, but it's really meant to be a framework and hopefully inspiration for those who are in need of such inspiration to prepare to have some potentially difficult conversations and thinking about end of life issues. And there's a whole multitude of end of life issues that come up that intersect with halacha in lots of really interesting ways. I'm sure that we've all heard various talks at different points about some of these issues, organ donation, healthcare directives, not necessarily the most fun things to be talking about, but there is a national initiative by the National Association of Chevra Kadisha that this Shabbos Vayechi, should be dedicated to talking about such issues. So we'll spend the first little bit just looking at the Parsha and seeing why this is an appropriate Parsha for it. And then we'll go through the way that I structured it. And I'm very happy to continue learning and conversing with anyone who would like to individually, or if there's enough desired for another group session to go through more sources in depth on this. But we have some introductory Parsha related material, then we'll go into a little bit of depth on some of the issues involved in estate of planning in halacha, and then more outside sources guiding and pointing to resources when it comes to some of the healthcare directives and discussion of organ donation and that sort of thing. And I don't have any direct sources here, but I think it goes, very much in the Parsha as far, also on the agenda for this should include attaining of burial plots and arrangements. This is another important topic. So the Parsha, of course, is Parshat Vayechi, and with it is the conclusion of Sefer Breshit. So if you're in Shul this Shabbos, it'll be a Shabbos Chazak B'nit Chazek, and there'll be a lovely meat luncheon for those who are signed up. And so the Parsha details the death of Yaakov, and right, so it's a prolonged description of his death and what goes into it, the brachot, the blessings that he gives to each of his children. The elaborate burial procedure, first the mourning period in Egypt, where interesting Yaakov, we're told, is mummified, which seems to be counter to Jewish tradition, and raises lots of interesting questions about, when public ceremony, it's hard to say conflicts because, again, this is Matan Torah. So and there was any halachic binding issues is a whole other fascinating question. But right, so Yaakov, as Yosef's father, is very much a public figure, and so if that dictates differently how one goes about mourning and how a family goes about mourning is a really fascinating question for a different time. But at the very beginning of the parsha, we read as follows: Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim shvasrei shana, Vayehi yemei Yaakov shnei chayav shevet shanim v'arba'im u'me'at shana. So Yaakov lives in Egypt for 17 years, and he lives a total of 147 years. Vayikrevu yemei Yisrael lamut, Vayikra livno li Yosef, Vayomer lo imna matzati chen be'einecha, simna yadcha tachet yerechi, v'asita imadi chesed v'emet, al na tikbarini b'mitzrayim. Yaakov's days were coming to an end. He knew it was close to the time that he was going to die. He calls his son Yosef and he says to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, place your hands on my thigh and do with me chesed v'emet, kindness and truth. Do not bury me in Egypt. V'shachafti im avotai u'nesatani mimitzrayim u'kfartani b'kfuratam. I want to be buried with my ancestors, so take me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial plot." Vayomar anochi asech barecha. Yosef says, "I will do as you have told me." Vayomer hishava li vayishavalo vayishtachu Yisrael avosh hamita. Yaakov says, make an oath to me, and Yosef does. He swears, and Yaakov sits up at the top of his bed. And then the Torah continues. It tells us, after this happens, Yosef is told that your father is sick, and he takes his two children with him, Menashe and Ephraim, and he goes and he visits with his father with his two sons. And we, of course, have the bracha, the blessing that Yaakov gives to Ephraim and Menashe, which is many families use that text of that bracha to bless their children every Shabbos night. And we have the switching of the hands and all of that. But in the course of this, Yaakov says to Yosef, I'm picking up now in verse number 5. Your two sons were born to you in Egypt before I came, Ephraim and Menashe. They will be like my children. They will be like Reuven and Shimon. And so Ephraim and Menashe are part of the 12 tribes that are, when we talk about the 12 tribes of Israel. And any children that you had afterwards, after I was already in Egypt, they'll be like your children. And then he goes on a bit of a tangent, and he says, "Ani b'voimi padan meitay alai Rachel be'eretz Canaan, b'derech ba'od kivat eretz lavo Ephrata, va'ekbereha sham b'derech Ephrat hi beit lachem." When I was traveling from Padan, my wife Rachel died on the road, in the land of Canaan, on the road, just before the town or the city of Ephrat. I buried her there on the way to Ephrat, which is Beit Lechem. And it seems like a bit of a tangent, and then it continues and tells us about the blessing of Ephraim and Menashe. If we go a little bit later, we'll come back to this in a second. If we go a little bit later, in the end of chapter 49, we're told after he blesses the children, Kol Elash Yivtei Yisrael Shnei Masar, right? These are the 12 children of Jacob. Zot asher diber lahem avihim vayvechotam ish asher kivirachato beirachotam. He blesses each one according to the blessing that they were deserving of. Vayitzavotam vayomer alehem ani ne'asaf el ami, and he commands them and he says, I am about to die. Kivroti el avotai el hamarasha b'stei Ephron hachiti. Bury me in the cave of Ephron the Hittite. B'ma'arasher b'stei hamachpelah asher pnei mamrei be'eretz Canaan asher kana Avraham et hasadeh be'et Ephron hachiti la'achuzat kaver. In the cave which Avraham purchased from Ephron. So he again repeats his desire to be buried in the land of Israel. Right. Another interesting end of life topic is the practice that many have in discussion whether it is a mitzvah to be buried in the land of Israel. And so this seems to be the source for that Yaakov insists that he not be buried in Egypt. He wants to be buried in Eretz Canaan. Okay, so let's go back for a second. The parsha opens with Yaakov calling just Yosef and telling him, Yosef, I want to be buried in in the land of Canaan with my ancestors. And then this desire of Yaakov to be buried um, in the land of Canaan is repeated at least two or three more times in the parsha. So number one, why is it repeated so often? First question. Second question, why does he specifically call Yosef here? And the third question, which I've spoken about in previous years, is um, Yosef in verse 30, in chapter 47, verse 30, says, Anochi esechi barecha, I'll do exactly as you told me to do. And then in the next pasuk, pasuk 31, Vayomer hishav ali vayishavalo. Yaakov says, your word isn't good enough. I need you to make a swear. I need you to make an oath to take a shvuah. Why the insistence on the shvuah? That's the first set of questions. Before I offer any of my thoughts, and anyone have any thoughts on this?
Well, Joseph is still viceroy of Egypt, and so he would be the authority figure, perhaps even among the sons.
Okay, good. So then Rashi actually says this, right? Rashi, if we go to the next page, Vayikra livno li Yosef, l'misha yacholet biyado la'asoto. He calls Yosef because Yosef is the one who would have the ability to carry out his wishes. If he calls Reuven or Shimon, they don't really have the same power, the same authority. So of course it makes sense that he would call Yosef. Right? So
But
just yeah,
I'm sorry. But by the same token, Yosef may be right viceroy, but he isn't. He's second in command. And what if Paro says to him, "No, I'm not letting you go"? I mean, he would have sworn already, but maybe he would have been prevented from actually
yeah,
doing it. I mean, that would have been problematic. We know that Paro
right.
actually let
So
him go,
it's
but
it's unlikely that Yaakov would have been able to call Paro directly.
yeah.
So calling the second in command is a pretty good starting point at least. And there are many who say that that's the reason why he made him take a shvuah, is that in case Paro would say no,
Yeah.
Yosef would say, well, it's not only this is what he wanted, but I made a shvuah. This is like a now, no, this is more than just carrying out the wishes. This is something more binding. So many say that that's why he made him take the shvuah. Right?
Pharaoh
What I
might say yes and say yes, we're going to build a wonderful place for him, and we'll make a statue of him, and we'll do
right,
this and we'll do that and that.
right.
That could be the other option, because he seemed to be so happy to have them to come to
Yeah,
Goshen, and then he decided, okay, they've got good ground over there. Well, they can take care of my sheep. That'll be just fine. That's a good arrangement. He might think of something else.
yeah. So what I wanted to suggest, and again, this is clearly you know, the topic came first here. This, I think it's a legitimate read of it, but it's definitely because I knew this is what I would be talking about. But what I wanted to suggest is number one, um, this exchange occurs earlier, right? We're told by Kravu Yimei Yisrael Amut that his days to die is coming close, but it doesn't seem that it's the same closeness as we see at the beginning of chapter 48, where it says that someone comes and tells Yosef, your father is dying. You better bring the grandkids to see him for one last time. And so, as Yaakov is entering the last stage of his life, right? That's when he makes these arrangements. It's not necessarily that this is being made as death is imminent, or when he suspects death is imminent, but this is something that he's planning for in advance, and this is something that he has to take care of. Number two is an important thing, and oftentimes, unfortunately, rabbis deal with situations where family members aren't on the same page. And so designating one family member or communicating clearly to the family, this is what I want, and embodying that not only in a verbal, this is what I want, but in making the shvuah and in somehow concretizing it in a legal format is a very important thing. And the third thing I wanted to suggest here is that I didn't bring the entirety of chapter 48, but when he mentions the death of Rachel, right? So Rashi tells us, if we go to the next page, it's already here. Ani b'voi mipadan, right? He says, when I was going to Padan, that's when Rachel died. Afal pisha ani matriach alecha laholicheni li kaber beretz Canaan, v'lo kach asiti limcha. Here I am. I know it's hypocritical. I'm asking you to go out of your way and to make a whole big deal to bring me to be buried in Canaan. I didn't do the same thing for Rachel. I buried her on the road. Um, Shari Meta Samuch Lebeit Lechem, because I had no choice. She died where she died. So yes, that he is justifying it, but I think we could also read it as Yaakov is sort of learning the lesson. Maybe there's nothing that could have been done in the case of Rachel dying in childbirth while the family is on the move. But the fact that in Yaakov's eyes, the burial of Rachel, which becomes, by the way, the sort of idealized, right? Kol b'Raman nishma Rachel mivakal baneh, that the burial, the tomb of Rachel is seen as a place of compassion, a place of special prayers, and Rachel is the one who's going to ultimately play a huge role in bringing the Jewish people back from exile. But if in Yaakov's eyes, her burial was less than ideal, so he wants to avoid that, and so he's now taking the proper steps to correct it, and that might be why he invokes and why he mentions at all the death of Rachel here.
Well, I want to jump in. Like,
Yeah,
it's Yosef's mother,
right.
so that answers the question of why, like, Dafka Yosef,
Okay, okay.
right?
It
Because,
could have been
like,
Binyamin, right? Right.
not, I guess you could say that, but Benjamin doesn't really even know his mother, right? Like, she
Right.
dies during childbirth. So I think
Right.
maybe it's this worry, right? Of, like, I didn't do right by he doesn't know his son so much at this
Yeah.
point, so
Yeah.
maybe that's part of it. I like that.
Okay.
I like the Rashi though.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah, the
beautiful.
I
Rashi's
don't say
great.
that often, but I like the
Yeah.
Rashi. Yeah.
Okay. Redeeming Rashi. Beautiful. Okay. So just one more pre-thought here, and that is if we go to Sefer Devarim now, when right Moshe we know has been told for many, 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 many times that he's not going to be allowed to enter into Eretz Yisrael. And he's begged and he's pleaded and he's done all that he can. But when the time for Moshe to die finally comes, we read as follows. Um, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe be'etzem hayom hazeh lemor. God speaks to Moshe on this very day, saying, Alei el har ha'avarim hazeh, har nevo, asher be'eretz Moav, asher al pnei Yerecho, v'rei et eretz Canaan, asher ani notin livnei Yisrael la'achuzah. Ascend Mount Avarim, which is Mount Nevo, in the land of Moab, on the border of Yericho, and see the land of Canaan, which I'm going to give to the Jewish people. Umutz bahar asher ata oleh shama. You'll die on that mountain. Ve'hasef alamecha ka'asher meit Aharon achicha. Just like Aaron died, b'hor hahar v'yasef alamav. Aaron died on Hor Hahar, and he was gathered to his nation as well. Rashi tells us, Kasher meit Aharon achicha, as Aaron died, Rota mita shera'ita v'chamadeta ota. Right, the same death that you saw happen to Aaron. What is that death? Shivshit Moshe et Aaron beged rishon v'yobisho le'elazar v'chein sheni v'chein shlishi. There's a whole elaborate process whereby Moshe was involved in removing the Bigdei Kahuna, the priestly clothing, from Aaron and transferring it and putting onto Aaron's sons. And so Aaron had the great comfort of knowing that his son was going to take his place as the Kohen Gadol, that there was that continuity in the passing on of his role to the next generation. Right, so that's again, it's a beautiful thing. But what Hashem is telling Moshe here, among other things, is that there is an ideal and a beautiful way to die. Right, there is a way that we can make. Again, death is not a pleasant topic, and no one looks forward to it. But knowing that it's going to happen to everyone, there are ways that it can be, quote, more beautiful and more pleasing. So that's sort of the introduction in the Parsha tie-in. Again, I'll pause if there's any further thoughts or questions on what we said so far? Okay. So the first topic I wanted to get into, and in this one we're going to go a little bit more in depth with some sources. Again, there are multiple tractates of Talmud that deal with many of these topics, and so this is just to give a taste for what some of the issues are. But the starting point when it comes to, we're starting with wills and estate planning. The starting point is in the story of Benot Tzlafchad, where we're told that the Torah seems to have clear-cut rules for inheritance, right? So we know we're told, right, that sons are meant to inherit and not daughters. And if there are no sons, so then daughters can step in and inherit. But that fundamentally inheritance goes to sons, right? Again, the Talmud deals with all sorts of nuances. The most basic distinction is a married daughter, right? The assumption is that a married daughter doesn't inherit because she'll be taken care of by her husband. An unmarried daughter, so then there are provisions to caring for her, although she's not technically an an inheritor or an heiress in the same way. And then we also know in source number 9 from the right when the Torah describes if the man has two wives, an ahuva and a snua, a more beloved one and a less loved one. So he's not allowed to skip over if the bechor, if the firstborn is the son of the least favored wife. He's not allowed to show favor to the non-bechor, who's the son of the favored wife. So from here we get the notion of the bechorah of the firstborn inheritance, which is according to the Torah double what the other children get. So that's the Torah is pretty clear in that, and that gets concretized in the Mishnah in number 10. Seder Nachlaot Kachu. This is the order of precedence with regard to inheritance. Ish kiamutu vein ein lo v'avarta nachlato levito bein kodem labat. Right. So the Torah tells us if a man dies without sons, then you can give to the daughters, which tells us that if there are sons, then the son takes priority over daughters. Kol yotzei yerecho shel ben kodin labat, and that includes the descendants. Right. So grandchildren from the son also would take precedence over a daughter. Bat kodemet le'achin. A daughter takes precedence over the father's brothers or siblings. Yotze yarchei shel bat kodmin la'achin, as do her descendants. Achin kodmin la'achei ha'av. Your siblings take precedence to aunts and uncles. Yotze yarechin shel achin kodmin la'achei ha'av, as do your nephews and nieces take precedence over aunts and uncles. Zehakal kol hakodim benachala yotzei yarecho kodmin. So the general principle is anyone who takes precedence in inheritance, so their descendants take precedence as well. Ha'av kodim lachol yotzei yarecho, but the father takes precedence over any descendants. Right? If a man's father is alive when the man passes away, so the father gets first inheritance. Okay, so that's again we're glossing over and going very quickly, but that's the basic rules. And then there's a question. The Mishnah in Bava Batra raises the following question: Ha'omer ish ploni b'ni ish ploni yershani bimkom sheyesh bat biti tirshani bimkom sheyesh ben lo amar klum. So the first position in the Mishnah says as follows: if a man makes a statement, I want Mr. Smith to be my inheritor, to be my heir. If this man who made the statement has children, has a daughter, doesn't have son but has a daughter, or biti tirshani, my daughter will inherit me, b'makom sheyesh ben, when he has a son, lo amar klum. It's an ineffective statement. Why? Shehitzna al ma shekatuv b'Torah. We just saw the Torah tells us that there are priorities and that there's a set order of inheritors. So you can't undo what the Torah. You can't go against what the Torah says. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer im amar al misha ra'ui liyorsho dvarav kayam. Nope. Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka disagrees. He says as long as the person that he designated is a worthy inheritor in some way, then his words are valid. But if the person is not appropriate, whether that means has no blood relation or for some other reason is not appropriate to give to, then the words are invalid. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka seems to say that you can go against the rules set up in the Torah, so long as the person that is designated is deemed worthy in some way. Okay, the next source plays this idea out more, but the basic question is whether we are halachically bound, whether we are obligated to follow the rules of precedence set up in the Torah in the first Mishnah we saw, or if you're allowed to go against them. Shulchan Aruch tells us, number 13, right? So the Shulchan Aruch has gone through all the different rules and priorities in inheritance. He says this applies if it is stipulated in terms of Yerusha, in terms of inheritance. If you say, I want my daughter to inherit instead of my son, or I want Mr. Smith to inherit instead of my daughter, so that's problematic. Aval im amar lashon matana dvarav kayamim. But if you say, I make a gift to Mr. Smith, and thereby, there's nothing left in the estate to give my son, but if you do it as a gift, as opposed to an inheritance, then it's fine. Lefichach, therefore, hamechalik nechasav al piv kishehu shchiv meira. Right? If someone is on their deathbed and makes an oral will and disbursement of the estate, and he gives more to one child and less to another child. And he gives the bechor in the same level as he gives everyone else. Or he gives someone who's not a halachically deserving heir. His words are valid because he does this as a gift, as a matana, and not as a Yerusha. So the Shulchan Aruch is telling us one key principle here is that, right, maybe I should have spelled it out a little bit clearer, but generally, in our day and age, people are not so comfortable with these rules of Yerusha because we believe that daughters should inherit equally to sons, and we're a little bit uncomfortable with the notion of the Bechorah as well. And so I would venture to say, 99% of Jews in the world who go through the trouble of making a will and thinking things out want to distribute to their children equally. Maybe not 99%. Yeah, Avi.
I'm guessing that halachically we look at a will as a matana and not as Yerusha, right?
So
if somebody dies without a will, then
yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah. So one question is, does this mean you can make a will? And the second question is, if one doesn't make a will, if you don't have a will in place, does that mean that we have to resort to the Torah guidelines?
Are we missing something here? Because where we are, we have to obey the laws of the state. Dina malchuta dina. Doesn't that
Right. Well, but you can distribute, the state allows you to distribute your estate however you want to.
There's also something called a halachic will.
Yes. We'll get there.
Oh, okay.
We'll get there. We'll get there. Okay, so then we have another possibly contradictory source. Not exactly the same scenario, but the Mishnah tells us if someone writes their kids out of the will, gives all of the money to a charity, to a business partner, to whoever, and writes their kids out of the will, Masha Asasui. What's done is done. Okay, right? That would imply that you can write a will and not follow the rules of the Torah's inheritance. Ella ein ruach chachamim nocha mimenu. However, the sages are not pleased with him. And then Rabbi Shimon says, Im lo hayu banav nohagin keshura zachor latov. If he did it because his children really are undeserving and act improperly, so then it's for good. But if his children were deserving, he can do it. But ein ruach chachamim nocha mimenu. The sages aren't happy with him. whole discussion about what that means. Does that mean, okay, you can do whatever you want to do, and sometimes we clap our hands when someone does something, and sometimes we don't clap our hands, but it's done? Or does it mean that there's more of a penalty associated with it, and it really is halachically problematic? Then we have one more relevant source here, which is a case of source number 15. Holich mana leploni, right? So one person tells another person, bring this money to Mr. X. Halach ubiksho velo mitzao, and so the shaliach, the agent, goes and is unable to find Mr. X. Yachzru l'mishaleach, so you should return it to the sender. Mate mishaleach, if the sender dies in the interim, Rabbi Natan but Rabbi Yaakov Amru Yachzru liyorshe mishaleach. So one position says you should return the money to his heirs. Yesh omrim liyorshe misha nishtalchulo. Some say it should go to the heirs of the intended recipient. Yehuda Anasi Omer mishum Rabbi Yaakov Shamar mishum Rabbi Meir. Mitzvah lekayem divrei hamet. We have a mitzvah to fulfill the words of the dead. So therefore, you need to seek out the intended recipient or his inheritors, and that's what their position seems to be. The Midrash actually connects this idea, mitzvah l'kayim divrei hamet, back to our parsha, to Yaakov Avinu. When Yaakov tells his children, this is what I want you to do, he says that they did it because mitzvah l'kayim divrei hamet. It's a mitzvah to fulfill the wishes of the deceased. Okay, those are some basic sources. Again, there's entire tractates, and we just looked at the Mishnayos, really. So there's extended conversation about this. But with these in mind, as Cheryl rightly notes, there are halachic wills. And there's actually a few different types of halachic wills. I have links here to various sources that give both some basic background reading as well as some basic forms. There are a few different types of halachic wills. One halachic will says basically go to a lawyer, prepare your will as you want it prepared, but add a clause that says this should all take effect 1 minute prior to my death. Why? Because we want it to be a matana and not a yerusha. We want it to be a gift and not an inheritance. So there's a whole halachic discussion about whether someone who's dead can give a gift. Not everyone loves this idea because they say, right, if I go to my lawyer today, please God, I live for many, many, many more years to come, so I can make a gift on what I own now. And really, halachically speaking, to affect that gift, even if I say it will only be transferred to my children at the time of my death, they need to make a kinyan. They need to make some sort of formal acquisition. But what if I acquire a new asset in 5 years from now? I get a new car, I get a new whatever. So if it's not included, right? So there's not everyone is thrilled with the idea of just making it a gift because you can't necessarily account for everything that will be acquired between the time of the writing of the will and the time that the will takes effect. Yeah, question.
If you hand a copy of the will to the relatives, does that count as a kinyan?
That could count as a kinyan if you hand a copy, but so that there's still the problem of new assets that come in, and there's also right. There's also a question about right, but there's also a question of bank accounts or stocks or things that don't necessarily have a set monetary value or that you don't necessarily have possession of. So not everyone is thrilled with that, but certainly there is strong precedence to say that if you make it as a gift, then it's then it would work and would avoid a lot of problems. A second suggestion is called chilek chatzi zachar, to give a portion of half of what the males get. Don't ask about the background of this, why it's called that. The basic premise of this is as follows. The father has a son and a daughter, 2 sons and 2 daughters. He wants to give to his daughters equally as his sons, but he knows that halacha says that's not how things work. So what does he do? He says, let's say that father has done well for himself, has a nice sizable estate, but not Elon Musk type of estate. So he takes, he says, I pledge, and again, there's nuances about how much to do this and how, but I pledge, I promise to give $1 billion to my daughter as a gift to take effect a minute before I die. So that's an obligation that the father now has, that his heirs, the sons, have to first take care of any debts before they're able to collect on any assets and any inheritance of their own. So then the father says, so my estate, my heirs are responsible for providing this gift, unless my assets are distributed in the way that I lay out in the will. Unless they're distributed in the way that I want them to be distributed, then this obligation that I took that he takes on to give his daughter some exorbitant sum goes away. And so that's the solution that Willig prefers. Jeff Landau, I think you asked the question about Dina de Malchusa Dina, about the laws of the land should apply. So there's a huge debate among poskim as to what areas we apply Dina de Malchusa Dina, what areas we don't. Rabbi Willig, who's one of the leading poskim in America at Yeshiva University, feels very strongly that Dina de Malchusa Dina should not apply in laws of inheritance, that it should be limited to public safety issues. Certainly you have to pay the speed limit, gun safety laws, things like that. But that when it comes to areas where halacha has a deeply vetted and deeply developed tradition and rules, that Dina Zamochos Dina shouldn't apply. Other posts can disagree and say that no, so long as a will is prepared in accordance with state and federal laws, then that would suffice and nothing else is needed. So again, you have links here to a few different, and these have forms, and if you already have a will prepared, you can add in basically just one paragraph stipulating either that it's a gift to take effect 1 minute before death, or if you want to go the route of the of giving some exorbitant sum to one child, which has to be enforced unless the estate is distributed in the way that you see fit. A few different ways to work around it, but there are some serious halachic issues that have to be contended with. Right, and again, but the halachic default, Jeff, I don't know what would happen in such a case if someone doesn't have a will, and I assume, I don't know, whatever the claim would be that assets should be distributed evenly among all surviving children, and then one of the children comes and says, "No, I want to go to Beis Din, and I want Beis Din to distribute it al-pi halacha." How such a case would get decided, I don't know. I don't know how that would work out. My message here is don't let things get to that point. That everyone should be involved in estate planning before it comes to that point.
Are there records of very rich people having these problems?
Probably more so than very poor people. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. These are issues that affect both the rich and the poor. And oftentimes if it's someone who's rich, then we hear about the more contentions. I imagine it's true in less large estates also, but we only hear about the larger estates and their fights.
We were
Would love
told
to
it was
hear
very important to make excuse me, that it's very important to make wills because the state would get the state taxes and so on would be so much greater if there's no will.
Right. So you need a good state attorney also who can help you figure out how to structure all that stuff. I have zero expertise in that. But yes, that is definitely true. There's many advantages to having a will, and so very important. And there are resources available to help in that. Okay, so moving to the next topic is in general, end of life treatments or what we call healthcare directive. So there's some technical terms, but basically, a healthcare directive is a legally binding document that says in the event that someone becomes unable to articulate and make decisions for themselves, what their preference is for care, for medical care and treatments, and also for non-treatment. So again, there's a huge literature of materials on these issues as relates to halacha. Um, right, some of the really interesting discussions and important issues are, um, does halacha allow for situations of DNR, do not resuscitate? Does halacha mandate that everyone be, what's in medical jargon called heroic measures? So we insist that doctors have to do anything and everything possible to save the life of a person, even if it will result in, we'll call, a poor quality of life, right? The most extreme example is if someone is comatose, if someone is vegetative, right? So that gets into the questions of how is death defined? And that's a major debate among poskim, whether we use a brain, definition of brain death, cessation of heartbeat, all sorts of really difficult and interesting conversation topics. All questions of hospice care, questions of, and then there's questions of organ donation. Um, so again, we're not going to cover all these. The same organization, Amatai, which has some of the material on wills. Amatai is a Jewish organization run by Rabbi Shlomo Brody, whom I've quoted many times. He wrote the book on Jewish war ethics that we've had some learning sessions together on. He wrote the book Guide for the Complex, which is the his article in the J Post, in the Jerusalem Post, about contemporary halachic issues. We spent many years going through that book during Sudah Shlishit. He's a really fascinating guy. And one of the advisors on Amatai is Rabbi Jason Weiner, who went to yeshiva with me, who's the chief pastoral care chaplain at Cedar Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. He's one of the leading voices on Jewish medical ethics and halacha in America and in the world these days. So what they put together on their website, this really interesting document, Key Principles of Decision Making Regarding End of Life Treatment, and you can read it here. But just that recognizing that there is a continuum, that there's not always one answer that halacha mandates, as we often assume. It must be that halacha has a clear answer, but no, that there's a balancing of all sorts of values and all sorts of issues at play. One of them, which really I thought they framed very well, is that Judaism believes in extend living, not dying. The goal of healthcare decision making is to extend living, not to prolong dying. And so that gets into questions of what's considered, quality of life, really important things, right? It discusses palliative care, hospice care, again, all these important things. And what they have is, I can pull up the website and show you. They have a really interesting. Do you see that, or are you still seeing the source sheet? You see the
Yeah,
webpage?
see it.
We see the
Yeah.
webpage.
Okay, so they have a
That was our new webpage.
no. Oh, right. It's called Nitivot. Their end of life program is called Nitivot, and so they have a healthcare directive, which you can fill out online with them, and you can register it with them, and also the National Association of Chevra Kadisha not only have these documents, but they also are creating now sort of mini cards that have a link to it so that you can attach it to your driver's license. And that the idea is that it should be accessible because oftentimes we hear about situations where someone has gone through all the right steps and completed a healthcare directive and made their wishes very clear, but then they get rushed to the hospital and the doctors don't have that. And the doctors, in the absence of that, are required to do everything in their power, even if it's not necessarily what the person would want. So trying to avoid those situations. So they have the healthcare directive. They also have this conversation guide, and the conversation guide is meant for families to go through this together and sort of identify what is your preference, right? How much pain is what do you consider quality of life that you would want to continue to have efforts made to prolong and to save your life, and what would you consider to be, I'm not sure that this is necessarily what I want. Um, right? What's your threshold for pain, right? What's your risk tolerance if you're, God forbid, diagnosed with a disease where there's an experimental treatment? Or would you prefer to go through a very potentially painful treatment that may have a big upside but might not? Or would you rather, is your preference to be made comfortable and or what's your preference for um, a treatment that may impair your cognitive ability or your decision making versus wanting so all these really difficult but important things to make clear again, as they say and as I hope is obvious, is it's the biggest gift that a person can give their family is to make their wishes clear before it becomes a guessing game. And so there's this healthcare directive, which again, I've helped a few people in the shul fill these out. I'm happy to help anyone talk through, or if you want another referral, I'm happy to help with that. But these issues are out there and are very important. All right, I'm going to stop and see if there's any questions, comments, or thoughts on what we've said tonight.
It's helpful if you have a primary care physician who is from,
It's definitely
who
helpful.
understands all of this. As in my work, I come across this all the time with my patients, and the healthcare providers who I work with are not necessarily going to be respecting Jewish halacha. If not everyone can be in a Jewish environment in a healthcare facility, and I've had instances where a patient was like on a tube feed, and the medical director decided it wasn't medically effective anymore, and was going to turn off the tube feed because of the condition that the patient was in. And the wife was adamant about, her wishes were to continue the tube feed, and she was up against the whole medical institution, and the doctor wanted me to write the order to discontinue the tube feed, and I said I will not. And I told the wife, ask to change your primary care physician, ask for Menachem Cooper. You don't have to keep this physician in this facility who's going against your wishes. And she did that. It was her right. She changed to Menachem Cooper, who is one of the frum doctors in nursing homes in this area, or he was. And he wouldn't write the order to discontinue the tube feed, so she got to continue. So it really depends on who your physician is and what medical facility you're in at any given time.
Right. I mean, yes and no. It definitely can be helpful to have a frum physician who understands these issues. It also doesn't have to be. I mean, you can, without a frum or a Jewish physician, you can tell them what you want and go through. And if you're confident in them, then you can, that's certainly legitimate.
Healthcare nowadays is all about money.
Yeah, I think it's often been about money. But the second point Cheryl raises is that again, even with the greatest plans, sometimes you find yourself or a loved one in a situation which you didn't plan for. That could happen for all sorts of reasons. That you're not in the hospital you thought you'd be in, you're not under the direct care of the physician you thought you'd be under, and so again, making these arrangements and making them known and accessible becomes the most important thing. Um, and unfortunately, there's all too many examples of it going the wrong way, even with the best intentions and with the best plans. But
are these documents considered a legal document in healthcare facilities?
Yes. Yes. So I mean, there's specific, and it goes state by state. Some states require that it be notarized. Some state require multiple witnesses. So yeah, they are very attentive to those details. They have on their website for Canada, for England, for Israel. Yes, it is set up to be legally binding, and yes. All right, so this is a lot to think about. Again, hopefully this isn't hopefully it's not the first time that this you're thinking about these issues. If it is, then I'll take that as a big win. But hopefully hopefully these are things that you have given thought and attention to already. If anyone would like to have any further conversations or explore more of these topics in depth, I'm happy to do that, and I'm sure that others would benefit from that as well. But with that, we come to the end of Sefer Breshit. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. And look forward to seeing everyone in shul this week to say it in the presence of the Sefer Torah. And we'll resume again next week. Sefer Shmot.
4:30.
4:15. No, 4:15.
Oh, 4:15.
Friday night.
Yeah.
It's the time Asar B'Tevet, the fast of the 10th of Tevet. The only fast that ever falls out on a Friday. And for that reason, we are davening Mincha Friday afternoon earlier than normal. Anyone that can be there to support the minyan would be greatly appreciated. And I'll send out some details on the logistics of how a fast day Erev Shabbos works to the listserv.
We do Kabbalah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rabbi.
All right.
Very much, Rabbi.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Laila Tov. Thank you.
Thank you.